What the pastor found in his daughter's room broke him. Keep listening to find out. The alarm clock on Adora's bedside table didn't just beep, it summoned. At 5:15 a.m., the sound felt like a gavel striking a mahogany desk. Adora Matthews didn't groan. She didn't roll over. She simply opened her eyes, her mind already cataloging the day's inventory. 3 conferences regarding disciplinary infractions, a broken boiler in the East Wing, and the looming reality that Martha's midterm progress report was sitting on the kitchen island unsigned. Beside her, Corey was a mountain of rhythmic breathing. In 4 hours he would be standing on a stage bathed in sapphire light, his voice a rich baritone that commanded the hearts of 2,000 congregants at Grace Fellowship. But here in the dim pre-dawn of their Baltimore row house, he was just a man who had forgotten to set the coffee pot the night before. She slipped out from under the heavy duvet, careful not to disturb Corey. He had been at the church until nearly midnight, fine-tuning the transitions for the upcoming regional conference. In the dim light of the hallway she could see the silhouette of his guitar case, a silent witness to the life they had built on the foundation of service. She moved through the house with the practiced silence of a woman who spent her life managing transitions. Adora's routine was a masterpiece of efficiency. By 6:15 a.m. she was downstairs, the aroma of dark roast coffee beginning to fill the kitchen. She opened her leather-bound journal, the pages crinkling under her pen. Lord, let me be a bridge today. Let me be the grace for the child who can't sit still and the patience for the teacher who is burning out. And please help me see my own children through the fog of my schedule. She closed her eyes, but her mind was already drifting toward the school's budget meeting at 10 a.m. Being the dean of a Baltimore elementary school meant being a social worker, a peacekeeper, and a visionary all at once. She dealt with challenges regularly: budget constraints, low enrollment, and finding and keeping faculty was a persistent hurdle. There were kids who arrived hungry, the ones whose parents were working 3 jobs, the ones who saw things no child should see. By 7:30 a.m., Adora was standing at the heavy oak doors of St. Jude's Elementary. To the parents dropping off their children she was the Iron Dean, immaculately dressed in tailored blazers, her hair pulled into a bun so tight it seemed to sharpen her intellect. She smiled, but it was a curated smile. Inside she was calculating. She saw the fraying hem of a kindergartner's sweater and made a mental note to check the family's tuition assistance file. She saw a teacher arriving 5 minutes late and prepared the gentle yet firm redirection that was her trademark. Her life was a series of small fires she was paid to extinguish. But as she sat in her office, surrounded by the smell of floor wax and old paper, her thoughts drifted to her own children. At St. Jude's she was the authority. At home she was a ghost hunter, searching for the versions of her children that seemed to be slipping through her fingers. While Adora navigated the politics of primary education, Corey Matthews was in the green room of Grace Fellowship, though it was less a room and more a storage closet filled with guitar cases and half-empty water bottles. He was tuning his Taylor 814C, the wood warm against his palm. Corey loved God and he loved music, but lately the bridge between the two felt like it was made of frayed rope. "Great set list for Sunday, Pastor Corey," a young intern said, popping his head in. "That new bridge in Sovereign Mercy really hits people in the chest." Corey nodded, offering a practiced, humble smile. "It's all for him, Caleb." But as the intern left, Corey let his shoulders drop. He thought about Adam. His eldest, 16-year-old Adam, was currently sitting in the front row of the youth chapel. Adam didn't need to be told to go to church. He arrived early to set up the chairs. He read C.S. Lewis for fun. He was the perfect son of a worship leader. And that was exactly what terrified Corey. Corey remembered being 16, the rebellion, the noise, the messy search for identity. Adam seemed to have bypassed the mess entirely, opting instead for a rigid, studious piety that felt performative. Or perhaps it wasn't. Perhaps Adam was simply better than him. Corey didn't know which thought was more unsettling, that his son was a prodigy of faith, or that his son was wearing a mask just as heavy as Corey's own. The day for Adora was a blur of high-stakes empathy. At the school, Adora navigated a crisis involving a broken window and a heartbroken second grader. She sat in her office, the walls covered in Student of the Month photos, and felt the familiar tug-of-war. To the world she was the pillar. To her family she was the person who forgot to buy more milk. By 3 o'clock the pillar, was beginning to hairline fracture under the weight of a dozen different lives. She had spent her lunch hour translating a complex disciplinary policy for a non-English speaking family, only to spend the following hour in a tense meeting where she had to defend the music program against a spreadsheet of red ink. The drive home offered no sanctuary, only a change of venue for her mental checklist. As her phone buzzed with late afternoon emails from the school board, Adora's mind drifted to the silence of her own kitchen. She realized with a pang of guilt that she hadn't just forgotten the milk. She had missed the window to sign her own daughter's permission slip for a field trip she herself had authorized months ago. The irony was a bitter pill. She was orchestrating the futures of 500 children while her own domestic life felt like a series of missed cues and empty cartons. The dinner table was the one place where the two worlds of the Matthews family were forced to collide. "Martha, phone away," Adora said, not looking up from her salad. "I'm just checking the soccer scores, Mom." "It's a civic duty," Martha replied, her voice brimming with the effortless sass of a 14-year-old who knew she could charm her way out of a paper bag. Martha was the wild card. If Adam was the steady hum of a hymn, Martha was a distorted electric guitar solo. Her knees were always scraped, her grades were a consistent C+ that could be an A if she tried, and she looked at the world with a mischievous curiosity that Adora found both terrifying. "How was the Greek study, Adam?" Corey asked, trying to bridge the gap. "Productive," Adam said, his voice level. "I'm working through the nuances of agape versus philia in the Johannine epistles. It's fascinating how the translation shifts the weight of the command." Martha made a gagging sound. "I'm working through the nuances of how to sneak into the deep end of the community pool after hours. It's fascinating how the fence height shifts the weight of the jump." "Martha," Adora and Corey said in unison. Martha grinned, her eyes bright. "Relax. I haven't done it yet. I'm just theorizing. Like Adam." After the kids cleared the table, Adam with methodical precision, Martha with a chaotic clatter, Adora and Corey were left in the kitchen. "She's pushing it again," Adora whispered, leaning against the counter. "I got a call from her homeroom teacher. She was caught trading customized hall passes for lunch money." Corey chuckled, then caught Adora's look and straightened his face. "She's creative, Dora. We just need to channel it." "And Adam?" Adora asked. "Is he happy, Corey?" "He's so quiet, Corey. He's 16. I don't know." "He's a good kid," Corey said, though the words felt hollow even to him. "We raised him to be this way. We raised him to be a person of good character, and that is what he is striving to maintain." The tension of the double life reached a fever pitch on a rainy Tuesday in November. Adora was at school late, dealing with a disciplinary hearing for a student who had brought a pocketknife to school. Her heart was heavy. She knew the boy's father had recently been incarcerated. She wanted to show mercy, but the dean had to uphold the code. Meanwhile, Corey was at the church, leading a rehearsal that wasn't going well. The drums were too loud, the singers were flat, and his own heart wasn't in the lyrics. He felt like a jukebox, plug in a prayer, out comes a song. He slipped out early, feeling a desperate need to be just dad. When he arrived home, the house was eerily quiet. He walked past Adam's room. The door was cracked. He expected to see his son hunched over a Bible. Instead, Adam was sitting on the floor, his head in his hands, a stack of college applications spread out before him. They weren't for divinity schools or Christian colleges. They were for secular universities hundreds of miles away. Corey didn't knock. He realized then that Adam wasn't studious because he loved the work. He was studious because it was his only ticket out of the expectations of the worship leader's son. Downstairs, the back door creaked. Corey moved to the landing and saw Martha sneaking in, her jacket soaked with rain, her shoes covered in mud. She saw him and froze. "I can explain the mud," she whispered, her usual bravado flickering. At that moment, the front door opened and Adora walked in, looking exhausted, her blazer damp from the walk from the car. She looked at Corey on the stairs, Adam peering out from his doorway, and Martha shivering in the kitchen. The composed dean and the anointed worship leader were gone. There were just 4 people in a house on Calvert Street, all of them tired of stretching themselves thin. "Is everyone okay?" Adora asked, her voice cracking. Martha looked at her shoes. Adam looked at his father. Corey looked at his wife. "No," Corey said softly. "I don't think we are. And I think that's the first honest thing we've said in this house in a long time." Corey decided to tackle Adam first and leave Adora to tackle Martha. At 16, Adam Matthews embodied discipline. He was athletic, respected by his teachers, and seemingly deeply committed to his walk with God. His Bible was worn, the spine cracked and soft from use, its margins filled with notes from sermons, devotionals, and his own quiet questions. His goals were clear: graduate strong, earn a scholarship, and make his parents proud. Yet tonight his father noticed a new layer forming beneath Adam's certainty, one that came with weightier implications. If Adam earned the kind of scholarship everyone expected, it might mean attending a prestigious secular university rather than a religious college rooted in faith. It wasn't a fear Corey decided to voice aloud, but it lingered in the back of his mind. Adam also had another interest: Naomi. She wasn't loud or flashy, just thoughtful and sincere, the kind of girl who listened fully when you spoke and asked questions that made you pause before answering. Adam met her during an after-school tutoring session for chemistry. She had slid into the seat beside him with a shy smile, her notebook already open, pencil poised as if she didn't want to miss anything, not just from the lesson but from the world. Something about her curiosity drew him in. Naomi didn't pretend to know everything. She asked questions Adam hadn't considered and laughed easily when she made mistakes. She had a quiet confidence that didn't demand attention, yet held it effortlessly. Adam found himself noticing the way she furrowed her brow when concentrating, or how she tapped her pencil when she was nervous. For the first time, Adam told his dad that he felt his carefully ordered world was shifting just slightly, but enough to be concerning. Adam had always believed temptation came loud and obvious, something dramatic you had to fight off with prayer and scripture. But this felt different. This felt gentle, subtle, almost harmless. He wanted to text Naomi late at night, replaying their conversations in his mind, but remembered his early morning workouts and the discipline he'd worked years to build. He wanted to spend every free moment with her, but felt convicted when prayer slipped into routine, something done out of habit rather than hunger. Adam wasn't tempted to abandon God, but he feared something more dangerous, slowly replacing him. Corey listened to his son. He really listened to what he may have never invited before. "Dad," he said quietly, his voice barely carrying in the empty sanctuary, "how do you love someone without losing yourself?" Corey looked up, instantly recognizing the weight behind the question. He motioned for Adam to sit beside him. "You don't lose yourself when love is rooted in God," Corey said after a moment. "But you do have to be intentional. Anything good can become a distraction if it isn't submitted." Adam nodded, absorbing the words. They didn't solve everything, but they grounded him. Meanwhile, Adora and Martha were engaged in their own deep conversation. Martha stood there with her damp clothes clinging to her skin, her jacket soaked through with rain, her shoes caked in thick brown mud that flaked onto the clean tile floor beneath her feet. A thin line of water trailed behind her where she had walked in, betraying her attempt to play down her obvious deception. Her hair, usually pulled back with careless confidence, hung loose and frizzed around her face. "I can explain the mud," she whispered, her voice reducing to something fragile. Martha didn't respond right away. Adora Matthews stood in their arms folded, not in anger but in exhaustion. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, marking each second of silence. "Martha," Adora finally said, her voice calm but firm, "where have you been?" Martha swallowed. The truth sat heavy in her chest. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was layered. Because it was tangled with half-decisions, resentment, curiosity, and a growing sense that she didn't quite fit the version of herself everyone else seemed to expect. "I was at the creek," she said quietly. "The creek," Adora repeated. She nodded. "By the old footbridge. The one near the woods." Adora's brow furrowed. "You know we don't allow you there alone. Especially in weather like this." "I wasn't alone," Martha blurted out, then immediately wished she hadn't. The silence returned, thicker this time. "With who?" Adora asked gently. Martha hesitated, then exhaled sharply. "With people who don't keep asking me if I'm okay with God." The words landed harder than she intended. Adora flinched, not visibly but enough for Martha to notice. Adora sighed and gestured toward the chair. "Sit down, sweetheart. You're dripping everywhere." Martha obeyed, sinking into the chair as water pooled beneath her. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how cold she was, not just from the rain. "We weren't doing anything bad," Martha said quickly, as if anticipating an accusation. "We just talked." We listened to music. We skipped rocks. Adora almost smiled at that. Almost. But that doesn't explain why you didn't answer your phone, Adora said. Martha looked down at her hands. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a cruel reminder of the missed calls and unread messages she'd intentionally ignored. I needed space, she said. From you guys. From expectations. From all of it. Adora sat across from her now, lowering herself to Martha's eye level. From God. Martha didn't answer right away. She had asked herself that question 100 times over the past few months. Was she running from God or just from the version of faith that felt suffocating? The one that felt rehearsed. Predictable. Inherited. I don't know, she finally admitted. I just feel like every time I walk into church, everyone already knows who I'm supposed to be. And I don't. Adora leaned forward. And who do you feel like you are? Martha shrugged, tears stinging her eyes. I don't know that either. That's the problem. Her voice cracked then, the bravado fully gone. I try, she continued. I really do. I sing the songs. I bow my head. I sit through sermons. But it feels like I'm watching someone else live their faith and I'm just copying their movements. Adora reached out affectionately, placing a hand over Martha's cold one. Faith isn't performance, baby. Everyone struggles with faith. Your dad, grandmommy. Your brother struggles too, Adora said quietly. Martha looked up, surprised. Adam has always looked so perfect. He presented as perfect, unfazed and ultra-committed. Martha could not imagine that he ever felt like she did or struggled in any way like she was. Adam is disciplined. That doesn't mean he doesn't wrestle, Adora shared. Martha let that sink in. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. Rain beat harder against the windows, as if echoing the storm brewing inside her. At the creek, Martha said slowly, nobody cared what I believed. Or didn't believe. Nobody tried to fix me. I could just be. Adora nodded. And that felt freeing. Adora let that declaration sit in for a while. Sometimes no words were better than many. Martha sunk into the bosom of her mom as she poured out her fears and truths. She appreciated her mom for Judy listening. Not lecturing, just listening. At the end of their intimate session, Adora simply said, faith that hasn't been questioned isn't owned yet. And God isn't threatened by your questions. Martha tears continued to spill freely as the two remained in a lengthy warm embrace. The next morning in the Matthews household, life resumed its rhythm. But something had shifted. Martha still questioned. She still wrestled. She still sometimes felt out of place in her Christian family. But she stopped pretending those feelings didn't exist. She asked harder questions and pressed her dad and mom for clarity on matters that seemed foggy, abstract or archaic. The answers were but always favorable, but she listened more than she spoke. She stayed even when it would have been easier to leave or end the conversation. The tension that had lived in Adam's shoulders and stomach for weeks finally began to dissolve as he felt the relief of sharing his personal thoughts about Naomi with his father. For a long time he had kept his thoughts behind a locked door, fearing that sharing his personal life might lead to judgment or a lecture he wasn't ready to hear. But his dad was actually really cool with hearing his thoughts and giving him sound advice. To Adam's surprise, his father didn't respond with a list of rules. Instead, he shared a few stories of his own younger years, admitting to the same anxieties about balancing life with spiritual devotion. Adam felt a lightness he hadn't experienced in his ability to share and discuss his personal thoughts with his father. The secret wasn't a secret anymore, and the budding relationship now felt like something supported rather than something that needed to be hidden. Opening up hadn't just cleared the air, it had built a bridge. He felt closer to his father than ever, knowing they were finally walking on the same path, side by side. For Corey, the relief was profound and deeply personal. As a pastor of worship, his entire life was dedicated to leading others into the presence of God. He spent his Sundays orchestrating moments of spiritual connection for hundreds of people. Yet his greatest private fear was that he would fail to do the same for his own son. He had often laid awake wondering if his professional religious life would make faith feel like a chore or a performance for his children. He feared that his position in the church created an invisible wall, one where Adam and Martha might feel like they had to be perfect examples rather than human beings navigating the complexities of life. When Adam began to speak about his desire to remain committed to God while dating, Corey felt a massive weight lift off his chest. Yet he knew the same wasn't true for Martha. Martha seemed to have a predisposition to push the envelope, to rebel and to cross lines. As Corey's mind drifted to his daughter, the relief Corey felt for his son was tempered by a sharp, familiar ache of anxiety for his daughter. What Adora was unaware of was the fact that he found cigarette butts in her room last month when doing his weekly cleaning. The discovery had felt like a physical blow to his stomach, the pungent, stale scent of tobacco clashing violently with the sanctuary of a home he tried so hard to keep pure. As a worship leader, Corey's life was built on the theology of the temple, the idea that the body and the home were sacred spaces. Finding those crumpled filters tucked away in a jewelry box wasn't just a discovery of a bad habit. To Corey, it felt like a desecration of the peace he worked so tirelessly to maintain. He hadn't told his wife, because he knew her heart would break in a way that might lead to an explosion of motherly fear, and he wasn't sure the family could survive another firestorm right now. Keeping that secret had been a heavy, lonely cross to bear. Every time he stood on the platform at church, lifting his hands in praise, a part of his mind was back in that bedroom, staring at the evidence of his daughter's defiance. He felt like a hypocrite. How could he lead 1,000 people into a holy moment, when his own daughter was hiding rebellion in her jewelry box? The contrast between his two children was sharp and a constant source for much strife and prayer. He watched Adam now, who was looking out at the yard with a peaceful expression. Corey realized that his son's openness was the only thing keeping him from spiraling into total despair over Martha's half-truth and deceptive life. Adam's commitment to God gave Corey hope that his parenting wasn't fundamentally broken, that the values he preached weren't invisible to his children. Corey knew he couldn't keep the secret forever. Martha was crossing lines that weren't just about pushing the envelope. She was engaging in behavior that could harm her. And he was sure that the story of the creek that she shared last night was just another half-truth to her mother. He felt a wave of guilt, but knew that today still wouldn't be the day to break that news to Adora. It was the end of another workday and Adora looked exhausted. She also looked concerned. "You're thinking about her, aren't you?" Corey asked his wife softly. Adora sighed, her shoulders dropping. "I just want her to know that the boundaries aren't there to cage her, Corey. They're there to keep her safe. But I'm afraid every time we reach out to pull her back, she just runs faster toward the edge." Corey watched the flickering light of the floor lamp dance in Adora's tired eyes. The exhaustion she carried wasn't just from her job. It was the heavy, cumulative weariness of a mother watching her daughter drift into a fog they couldn't penetrate. For a moment, Corey felt the familiar urge to protect her, to keep the secret of the cigarette butts locked away in the drawer of his mind, at least for one more day. On Sunday, as the last of the congregants filtered out of the lobby, Corey took a moment to stand by the piano, the scent of candle wax and expensive perfume lingering in the air. To everyone else, the service had been a triumph. Corey's voice had been steady, his leadership during the altar call particularly moving. But internally he felt like a man wearing a mask that had grown too tight. Adora approached him, her Sunday best looking slightly wilted after a morning of greeting families and intervening where necessary. "That was beautiful, Corey," she whispered, squeezing his arm. "You really reached people today." "I hope so," Corey replied, though his mind was miles away, anchored to a small jewelry box in a bedroom at home. "Adora, can we take the long way home? There's something I need to talk to you about." It couldn't wait until tomorrow, but I didn't want it to cloud the morning. As they drove through the quiet, tree-lined streets of their neighborhood, the contrast between his public role and his private reality felt like a physical ache. Corey pulled the car into a park overlook and turned off the engine. "It's about Martha," he began, his hands still gripped tight on the steering wheel. "I've been carrying something for a month. I told myself I was protecting you, but I think I was just hiding from the truth." Adora's face paled. She knew that tone. "What is it? Is she in trouble?" "When I was doing my weekly cleaning in her room last month, I found cigarette butts, Adora. Tucked away. Hidden." The silence in the car was suffocating. Adora looked out the window, her hand coming up to cover her mouth. For a woman who prided herself on the spiritual health of her home, the news wasn't just about a bad habit. It was a symptom of a much deeper, more rebellious fire. "I wanted to believe Adam's growth was a sign that we were finally in the clear," Corey continued, his voice thick with emotion. "But while I was leading worship today, all I could think about was the gap between the daughter we see at dinner and the daughter who feels the need to hide that from us. I'm the pastor of worship, Adora. I'm supposed to guide people to the truth, yet my own daughter feels she has to live a lie under my roof. Adora finally turned to him, her eyes brimming with tears. Why didn't you tell me when you found them? Because I was ashamed, Corey admitted, the confession bringing a strange, painful relief. I was ashamed of my failure to reach her. But seeing how Adam opened up to me this week, how much lighter he is now that he's being honest, it made me realize that holding on to this secret is only helping the rot grow. We can't help her if we're pretending the problem doesn't exist. He reached over, taking his wife's hand. I'm not the pastor right now, Adora. I'm just a father who is scared for his girl. And I need us to be on the same page before we walk through that front door. Adora leaned her head back against the seat, a long, shaky exhale escaping her. The long way home wasn't long enough, Corey. But I'm glad you told me. We can't keep performing on Sundays if we're falling apart on Mondays. As they pulled into the driveway, the sight of Martha's bicycle leaned haphazardly against the porch railing felt indicative of what was to come. For Adora, being a first lady and dean at an elementary school meant her entire professional and personal life was dedicated to behavioral intervention and character building. She spent her days de-escalating conflicts and guiding children toward better choices. Yet as she stared at her own front door, she felt stripped of all her professional expertise. I deal with at-risk behavior every single day, Adora whispered, her voice cracking. I can spot a child's cry for help from a mile away in my hallways. How did I miss this in my own hallway at home? Corey squeezed her hand. You didn't miss it, Adora. He hid it. There's a difference. They entered the house to find the living room quiet, but the tension was palpable. Martha was sitting on the sofa, still in her Sunday dress, but she had kicked off her shoes and was staring blankly at the television screen. She looked up as they entered, her eyes darting between Corey's somber expression and Adora's tear-streaked face. What's going on? Martha asked, her voice both curious and defensive. Is this about the service? Because I tried to look engaged, I swear. Corey said nothing. He simply sat in the armchair opposite her while Adora sat on the edge of the sofa. Martha, Corey began, choosing his words with the precision of a man walking through a minefield. This isn't about how you looked at service or what you did on Thursday. I found the cigarettes in your jewelry box last month. I haven't told your mom until today because I was trying to process what it meant. Martha froze. The color drained from her face, replaced quickly by a defiant flush of red. So what? You're going to give me a sermon now? Tell me my body is a temple, while everyone at church thinks we're the perfect family? No, Adora said, her dean's voice softening into that of a heartbroken mother. I don't care about the perfect family image right now, Martha. I care about why you feel you have to sneak around. I care about what's happening in your heart that makes you want to push us away. Martha stood up, pacing the small space behind the sofa. Because I am pushing you away. I'm tired of the act, Dad. My act. Every Sunday I stand there while you lead worship and I feel like the biggest phony in the room. Your friends, the church people. They talk to me like I'm some saint in waiting and I just want to scream. I don't feel God. I don't feel any of it. I told Mom on Thursday I just want to be me. The cigarettes. They're the only thing that feels real in this house to me because they're the only thing that isn't holy. The confession hung in the air, sharper and more painful than the scent of tobacco. Corey felt a wave of empathy so strong it nearly knocked him over. He realized that while Adam had found peace in his commitment, Martha was drowning in the pressure of it. Martha, listen to me, Corey said, standing up to meet her eyes. If you feel like a phony, it's because I haven't given you enough room to be a human being. Being a pastor's daughter isn't a job description. Your faith isn't a performance for my congregation. He took a step toward her, his voice dropping to a whisper. I'm sorry I kept the secret and I'm sorry if I made you feel like you had to be perfect to be loved. We aren't here to punish the rebel. We're here because we miss our daughter. Martha's lip trembled. The wall of defiance she had built began to show its first real cracks. For the first time in a long time, the house didn't feel like a stage. It felt like a home where the truth, however messy, finally had a seat at the table. Adora stepped toward Martha, her hands outstretched but careful not to crowd her. As a dean, she was used to the defensive crouch students took when they felt cornered, but seeing it on her daughter was a different kind of pain. Martha, look at me, Adora said softly. At school, I tell my students that a mistake is a data point, not a destination. But here, as your mother, I've realized I haven't been following my own advice. I've been so worried about you crossing lines because I know how hard the world can be, but I forgot that you need the freedom to make mistakes, even the scary ones. Martha wiped a stray tear with the back of her hand, her posture finally softening. I just feel like if I don't believe every single word the way you and Dad do, then I'm just an intruder in this family. Like I'm pretending to be someone I'm not just so you guys don't look bad at church. Corey felt a sharp pang of conviction. He realized that the pastor's kid trope wasn't just a cliché. It was a weight that had been crushing Martha's ability to find her own path. Martha, Corey said, leaning forward. If you're struggling with your faith, that doesn't make you a phony. It makes you honest. Even in the Bible, people wrestled with God. If you have to pretend to believe just to stay in our good graces, then we've failed you as parents. He took a deep breath, looking at his wife and then back to his daughter. The cigarettes. They were a symptom, weren't they? A way to feel like you had something that was just yours, something that wasn't sanctified by the church. Martha nodded slowly, her voice a mere whisper. I just wanted to feel like I wasn't a project. I just want to know if you'll still love me if I wasn't the girl in the front row singing every lyric. Adora sat back down, pulling Martha into the space beside her. We love you because you are ours, Martha. Not because you're a good student or a good Christian. We love the girl who is frustrated, the girl who is questioning, and even the girl who makes choices we don't agree with. The air in the room, once thick with the stale secret of the cigarettes and the heavy expectation of the church, finally began to clear. It wasn't a perfect resolution. There were still hard conversations to be had about health, trust, and the boundaries of their home, but the wall of perfection had been dismantled. As the evening turned to night, the three of them sat in the quiet living room. For the first time in a long time, the silence didn't feel like a standoff. It felt like a beginning. 3 weeks later, the atmosphere in the house had shifted from a brittle, forced harmony to something far more grounded and authentic. They were gathered around the dining table for Sunday dinner, a meal that used to feel like a post-service debrief, but today felt like a genuine refuge. Adam was vibrant, sharing more about his girlfriend and the way they were studying the Word together. The tension that had once lived in his shoulders had completely vanished. His transparency had given him a permanent seat at the table of his father's confidence. Corey looked at his son, then turned his gaze toward Martha. She wasn't leading the conversation, but she wasn't hiding behind her hair or her phone either. She was present. She had stopped performing the role of the perfect daughter, and in response, the house had stopped feeling like a stage. I was reading in James this morning, Corey said, not with the booming voice of a worship leader, but with the quiet reflection of a man who had been humbled. There's a verse that kept sticking with me. James 5 verse 16. Confess your faults one to another and pray one for another that ye may be healed. He looked at both of his children. I spent a lot of my career thinking healing only happened during a powerful chorus in a Sunday service. But I think the real healing happened in this room when we stopped pretending we didn't have faults. I'm sorry I made the confession part so scary for you both for so long. Adora reached over and squeezed Martha's hand. She had spent her week dealing with crises at the school, but coming home no longer felt like entering a second battlefield. It's a relief to just be us, Adora added. Martha, I want you to know that seeing you be honest about your doubts has actually helped my own faith. It's reminded me that God is big enough to handle our questions. He doesn't need us to protect his reputation by lying about how we feel. Martha still had questions and she still felt like an outsider at some of the church youth events. But the phony feeling was fading because she was no longer living a double life. Her cigarette-smoking days in your past, more so because she no longer needed a thing to make her feel real. Her parents invited her realness as disengaged as it may have seemed to others. I'm still not sure where I'm at with everything, Dad, Martha said honestly, picking at her salad. But I don't feel like I have to smoke a cigarette just to feel like a real person anymore. I can just be here. Adam smiled at his sister, a silent bridge of sibling solidarity forming between them. The preacher's kids were no longer defined by the pressure of the title, but by the grace of their home. Corey felt a profound sense of relaxation wash over him. His son was flourishing in his convictions, and his daughter was being honest in her wandering. As a pastor of worship, he finally understood that the most beautiful song he could ever lead wasn't one with perfect notes, but one sung by a family that finally had nothing to hide. Later that Sunday night the house was still. Corey and Adora had retreated to their room, leaving a rare, heavy silence in the hallway. Adam stood outside Martha's door. He didn't knock at first, he just looked at the sliver of light bleeding onto the carpet. He finally tapped twice and pushed the door open. Martha was sitting on her bed, staring at the empty jewelry box on her dresser, the one that used to hold her secrets. "You okay?" Adam asked, leaning against the doorframe. Martha gave a short, dry laugh. "I'm honest, apparently. Mom and Dad's new favorite word. It feels like I traded a secret for a spotlight and I'm not sure I like the view." Adam walked in and sat in the desk chair, spinning it to face her. "I get it. For a long time I thought if I just stayed quiet and did everything right no one would look too closely at me. I was hiding in plain sight." "It's different for you, Adam," Martha said, her voice rising. "You actually like the Greek studies in the youth group. You don't feel like you're suffocating every time the worship team starts a bridge. You're the golden boy. I'm just the girl who smells like a mistake." Adam looked down at his hands. "You think it was easy for me? Martha, I spent every night for a year terrified that if I admitted I wanted to go to a secular college or that I was interested in a girl who wasn't pre-approved by the deacon board, the whole house would fall apart. I wasn't being good, because I was a saint. I was being good, because I was scared of losing them." Martha softened, looking at her brother. "So we were both just running? You just ran toward the front row and I ran toward the creek." "Exactly," Adam said, a small smile appearing. "But Dad told me something this week. He said you don't lose yourself when love is rooted in the right place. I think he was talking about God, but I think he was talking about this family too. We don't have to be the worship leaders' kids in here. We can just be siblings." Martha reached out and shoved his shoulder playfully, though her eyes were damp. "Does this mean you're going to stop acting like my second pastor?" "Only if you stop acting like you're the only one with questions," Adam replied. For the first time in years the wall between the perfect son and the rebellious daughter didn't just have a crack, it was gone. They weren't performers on a stage anymore. They were just two teenagers figuring out the truth in the quiet of a Baltimore row house.
Thank you for spending this moment with me on Threads of Grace. As you go, remember, God's timing is best and grace isn't something you chase. It's something you walk in. May you be covered, guided, and gently reminded that God is present in every thread of your story. Whatever season you're in, trust that God is still weaving together every part of your life. Before you leave, like, subscribe, and leave someone an assuring comment or encouragement below. Your voice matters and will help to build up this community of believers. Until next time, keep walking in grace.